want to iterate our concern that tasers are not a simple alternative to firearms, and that in addition to the risk of serious injury and death, other risks include the risk of litigation to the city, the risk of overuse and unnecessary use, and risk of disproportionate impact of taser use on communities of color. There are a number of things that were brought up last time, and this time I'd like to comment on and hopefully get a few answers. I know there were many comments on the Draft General Order last time, and I think Commander Correa said some of them have been implemented in this latest version. I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on some of the additions. And I know one of the big concerns last time was that the Draft General Order did not in fact say that the use on pregnant women or children was prohibited, and I'm just wondering if that has been added in.
That was our last discussion today before this meeting, the issue of how to frame that particular part. So that's a work in progress. It'll be a day or two more. There were several other recommendations made last time that were implemented, and I can give them to you now or offline.
Yeah, that would be great. I think it would be helpful for the audience.
I don't want anybody to leave thinking that we're trying to figure out how it's okay to tase pregnant women. We're trying to figure out, sometimes you can't tell someone's pregnant. What the best way to describe a child is by age, by size, by weight. Skinny people, what's skinny versus whatever, and then elderly people. There's people in this room that consider me elderly. I like to think I'm not. So we don't want to insult anybody at the same time. So it's not that discussion's not being had, it's just that whenever you make a prohibition, it needs to be very plain to the officer what that prohibition is. If it's going to be size, height, weight, some degree. So that's where it's kind of hard, and we'd appreciate anybody if somebody has some vernacular that makes it really, really plain. Because again, we absolutely hear you, and we do not want to tase anybody that's in especially at risk category.
The issue of random audits with regard to ECW data downloads and reconciling those with the use of force logs maintained at the various units was inserted into the Draft General Order. The other one was to clarify that if someone were to use an ECW to prohibited the use around flammable liquids, that was in there already. We cleaned that language up based on a recommendation from the floor. And really identify quite a few training issues where while an order speaks to maybe a deployment, the training behind that order is critically important. And so some of the comments last time led to 3 separate training recommendations to consider around describing some of the risks associated to certain populations, such as the ones the Chief mentioned. So that's all in there.
I also think it's important that any deployment of an ECW would be a use of force. So it's important for who's ever making sure what they want is in the ECW order that you have to reconcile it against 5.01, which is our use of force policy. Right. So they're married. Right. It's the way the orders are written is that to not be in one does not mean you're not held to it if it's applied to a governing order. So everything with regard to a taser would be a use of force, and so you'd be married to several other general orders and policy.
And the other item adopted based on input from the floor was the issue of when a taser is used, that item becomes an item of evidence to preserve it for a later examination and trial or litigation. And I think that going forward, you're going to see a date at the top of the General Order draft at the Commission website that shows the latest iteration, and you're going to see certainly, I suspect, more amendments and suggestions put in based on the commentary we get tonight.
Right, thank you. And another question is related to the scope of appropriate use. I think it makes a little more sense if we look at the orders on top of one another. But we've heard somewhat different justification. I know we've heard a lot about the TCHO Chocolate shooting, and it seems that if in fact the taser is to be used as an alternative to firearms in those situations, that the draft order should state that clearly, and that the taser should be sort of on the, continuum of use of force, the same as a firearm. And if it's not, if it's sort of more akin, if the department thinks it should be akin to the use of a baton or pepper spray or another tool in the toolkit, it would be helpful if we could hear sort of where you think the taser lies on that use. Is it just as opposed to a firearm that you can use a taser, or is it in other situations?
Obviously, it's not. A firearm in all cases is deadly force, and an officer is only allowed to use it to protect his or her life from serious injury or death of that of another. And so that it wouldn't be the same. It would be just below a firearm. And
is the draft general order going to be amended to make that more clear, or are you just going to rely on the two policies together?
It would be put in the continuum of force just before a firearm.
Okay. Another question I have just relates to the way in which this is a pilot program. I don't think we've heard much about the scope, and I'm curious if it's supposed to be 6 months to a year, and then there'll be an evaluation period built into it, or if this is just pilot in terms of it being with a limited scope of officers.
The department's proposing the population. I think that the commission would probably prescribe the period of the pilot.
Okay, but that is a plan. I mean, maybe the commissioners have an idea. Is there an evaluation sort of built into this process? We'll try this for 6 months or a year and then see what has happened, or is that sort of envisioned?
Should I? Oh, okay. So yeah, I think that's what we're saying. Is I think the threshold question is there a need for tasers in San Francisco? And I think the next question would be, what does the policy and procedure look like? And then the next question would probably be, what's the term and conditions and all of that. So I think what's helpful is on all of those issues for people to provide feedback, but it's premature for us to answer what that would be, because it's going to be a result of this deliberation and learning everything there is to know and then applying that. So,
right. Another question I had was related to one of the other speakers. I know there was a consideration of a number of other less lethal options, and I'm wondering if those were investigated and sort of discarded, or if those are still on the table as well.
Those other alternatives, what you looked at, for the most part, were about pain compliance. The electronic control weapon is different in that there is a element of pain, but it's more on controlling the subject. We have systems in place where we have the pepper spray. Our officers are equipped with pepper spray. We're also equipped with other impact weapons. So the need to add another chemical agent, if you will, or a impact weapon is not there. The need is for a weapon system that controls a violent, aggressive subject.
So in the review of these less lethal options, those were sort of just considered because the resolution required you to, or is the police department also thinking of getting some of those additional beanbag weapons or pepper balls?
No, the question was to look at other less lethal options that might be short of the control weapon that is the taser. Mr. Currio alluded earlier to my experimentation. That I did the taser thing, so I can speak to the fact that it is very painful, but you are completely controlled.
We only have about 40 minutes left, and I want to make the line development, so I'm going to take one more question from you.
Sure. Something we brought up last time, and I think is a big concern, is just sort of a further justification for why this department needs tasers. And I know that, you cited the TCHO Chocolate Factory incident, and I think one question we have is, if that is one of the big justifications for this department's need, we would hope that there would be sort of a fuller investigation into that shooting, and maybe an independent investigation looking at all of the ways in which that situation might have turned out different, looking at the ways in which, would a taser even have been effective in that situation, or, was it the case that a firearm did have to be used? And I think we haven't exactly heard that. And just sort of related, I think, we haven't exactly heard from the department, these are the types of situations within, say, the last year or the last 2 years in which we think, in which we believe that a taser should have been properly used. And it would be great to see an example of, on X date, an officer was, involved in an incident with a man and he used a baton on him. We think that a taser would have been, a better option in that situation. I think those sort of examples would be helpful for the community to hear, oh, this is exactly where the department thinks that a taser would be appropriate, because I think what we've heard so far is just sort of in the place of a firearm. So I don't know if there is any sort of plan to release a report about the TCHO Chocolate Factory shooting, or if that's been evaluated any further.
The TCHO Chocolate Factory shooting has been evaluated. It was an in-policy shooting.
And has there been any talk of an independent investigation into that shooting?